Welcome to the Whiskey Congress. Honest, open talk dedicated to speaking the truth to those who are open to hearing it. Black, white, right, left. Most importantly, honest, bold, and fueled by good whiskey. In Whiskey Veritas, we are Whiskey Congress. Join the evolution.
Welcome back to Whiskey Congress. We're doing another show with me in the lovely state of North Carolina and Steve at home in Cleveland, where it was snowing when I left today. Is it still snowing?
Yeah. No, it's not still snowing, but the weather was pretty terrible all day. Cold, snowing. I mean, it seems like Cleveland is the standard setting for temperatures 40 degrees every day.
Do you have a beverage?
I do. So with me this evening, I have a little bullet bourbon.
Oh, nice.
Nothing too crazy, nothing too fancy. But I was also in a rush, so I just went to I keep bullet in my decanter. So
that's a solid choice. That's a good solid bourbon.
I just bullet. I think bang for your buck. In terms of, I know your bang for your buck buy is 10 high. But
a lot fewer bucks for 10 high.
A lot fewer bucks. But for those of us who don't live under a bridge.
That was unnecessary. Frankly, it doesn't help the show at all.
And drink our whiskey out of brown paper bags.
You're being a jerk for no reason. You this does not help anybody.
I think bullet, for $30 for the liter is just an overall good buy. Strong ABV, good quality flavor, goes well with a Manhattan if you want to make a Manhattan, or you could just drink it straight, or you could have a couple rocks in there. But Bullet is kind of my go-to bourbon, and I had Blanton's a little bit ago. Which
did not come out of my liquor cabinet, correct?
It did not come out of yours. I had just a little nip because I just got the bottle today, so I opened it and took a little nip. But the rest of my glass is Bullet. So
excuse me. So for what it's worth, I did some whiskey shopping this week when I was home, and we'll have a new one to review next time we're together in the studio. But one of the things I bought as a stock the bar kind of thing was a Bullet. So I'm totally with you that it is a very solid, good bang for the buck whiskey. I will not disrespect 10 High as my Manhattan bourbon. But anyway, how you doing? You had a pretty runaround weekend. I know I did too.
Yeah, I mean, just family stuff had me on the run between Cleveland and Youngstown, so nothing really to talk about there. Although I did get some cute pictures of the kid. But there were some other things going on this week. We have this week was the celebration, so to speak, of Dr. Martin Luther King and the 50th anniversary of his assassination, of his death. And there were a number of really good quality tributes to him and tributes to that day. There's some stuff on Sirius. There were NPR, PBS, all had different things on, throughout the week. And it was just a lot of it was really moving to kind of see it. It made me think about and reflect a lot. And I put a little clip on Facebook. I did a Facebook Live.
I saw that. I liked it.
Just kind of talking about it, and just kind of where it kind of puts my head when I sort of think about things like that. And so just before I get into it, what are your thoughts there?
The I Have a Dream speech is, if you listen to it in its entirety and it doesn't move you, check your pulse, because it is one of the best speeches I have ever listened to. I remember the first time I listened to it in any kind of, when I listened to it in its entirety, oddly, it was getting played on the Don Imus show in about 1999 when I listened to the whole thing, and it is just an amazing speech. When you think about Martin Luther King, it's impossible not to think about how he changed the tone of how are we going to get better as a country, right? He said, violence is not going to make this better, and he literally endured the attacks physically and publicly, in non-physical ways, and never broke stride. I don't know if his assassination had any big conspiracy talks about it. I mean, James Earl Ray was taken alive. He acknowledges he's the one who pulled the trigger. So,
James Earl Ray, up until his death, after he was convicted, wanted to change his plea and say that he didn't do it and that it was a conspiracy. No one really listened to him. At that point, I think a lot of people just kind of chalked it up to him getting attention. I guess in terms of Dr. King's death, I do, James Earl Ray, if you know anything about him, he was not a good criminal. Like, he had been caught. He had a rap sheet a mile long, wasn't considered a criminal mastermind. So how did he know where Dr. King was going to be? How did he know that he was going to come out on the balcony? Like, I don't think he had any military experience. So it's not like, Chris Kyle in American Sniper setting up a mile out to take out a target. This guy was, basically across the parking lot, sees King and, is a dead shot. So, I that part bothers me about the assassination a little bit.
The big difference.
I firmly believe that he had some sort of help. Dr. King had way too many enemies for just some halfwit to be able to know exactly where he's at, when he's going to be there, when he's going to come out on the balcony, and then take his head off. It just doesn't quite add up.
Well, I think there's a couple things that make it different than JFK and RFK. One of them is there was no Secret Service or high-quality professional protection team protecting Dr. King. So it's and there's no video of it, right? We see JFK get shot in Zapruder film. We see Sirhan shoot RFK. With Martin Luther King, I know I've seen like the image of people gathered around him after he was shot. I don't think I've ever seen a video. Is there one?
There's no video. There are, and there. Chances are the pictures of what you've seen have been like, him on the balcony laying there with people gathering around him.
Right.
There have been, there were police reenactments. Like, the police took a while to get there because, the police that were there in Memphis at the time basically said that they weren't protecting him. They didn't agree. There were a number of disagreements about they disagreed with him. They disagreed with his tactics. They felt that he made their job exponentially harder. So, they just said that they weren't going to protect him. So when they finally were able to get the police there, they had to kind of reenact what happened. And I think I believe by the time they got there, his body was still there. So that's some of the images of what you see after the fact. But I again, you're right. Like, he was a lot easier to get to. Even Malcolm X at one point in time had the Nation of Islam to protect him. Until a few years before he died as well. But I still, just the idea that, this guy was just able to just kind of hang out in the parking lot, see Dr. King out there smoking a cigarette, and then,
right.
For him to be out there at, 9:00 in the morning or whatever time it was, like that's where it just seems like somebody had to have been helping him.
I mean, from the conspiracy perspective, he was a threat to the U.S. participation in the Vietnam War, among many other things, right?
Yeah, I mean there was that.
And he was, I mean, he was shaking up the culture at the time. Accepted racism, obviously, very openly. I mean, not saying that with anything other than disgust, but he was shaking up the system. He was changing things in a way that lots of people were not comfortable with in positions of power. But I think the Vietnam aspect is also a big deal because there was a whole lot of money there, and when you throw in JFK and RFK and all that, all of that seems to be, in my mind, linked. If you look at the House Select Committee on Assassinations, and no, I won't go on a conspiracy nerd rant on you. But the assassination of Martin Luther King was also part of that because, I mean, can you imagine what that would have been like? In 1963, President killed. In 1968, Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy killed. These are three of the biggest figures in American culture gunned down in a 5-year stretch. It's crazy. Trying to process that into today, it's hard. We cannot.
Yeah, I mean, we couldn't even.
I mean, this would be like
fathom that right now. I mean,
I don't even want to put names on how to score this because it'll put my brain in a bad place. But it is nuts to think that happened, and that was our country in our parents' lifetime. And I was not alive. Make all the jokes you want, but it wasn't long. I mean, I was born in 1971, so Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy died in 1968.
I mean, you're right. And if you think about it, you had JFK in 1963. Between JFK and Martin Luther King, you had Malcolm X, who was assassinated in 1965. And then you had King, and then you had Robert Kennedy. And
in the same year.
It's amazing that stretch of history, those people being taken out. And yeah, maybe Vietnam War, but to me, in my mind, I think that it shows you how deep-rooted and deep-seated the power structure was for racism. Like, you can make the ties to Vietnam. I don't disagree with that, but I think the idea of, seeing a true revolution of a people that have been suppressed for hundreds of years in this country, and it was gaining support from a white president, his brother who was head of the Department of Justice. You had these charismatic leaders. Malcolm X had to go first because he was, by any means necessary, and Martin Luther King had to go because he was even more charismatic than Malcolm X, and more appealing to whites, to the point where they had to take them all out. That's my opinion. Is just that what that group of people that were all assassinated, what they represented was, something that I still don't think we've really fully seen come to fruition. Talking about, a lot of people were talking about this week, where are we now? And we've seen our first black president in Barack Obama. You've got black billionaires like Oprah and your athletes and the guy who started BET and all that stuff. But there's still some major problems, that we're seeing. And so I still don't think we're at that, mountaintop that, that Dr. King talked about in one of his last speeches.
It's tough to me to I love talking to you about this stuff because I think, you know, we're honest with each other, and we're you know, saying things that a lot of people are uncomfortable talking about. But this sort of thing it's really easy for me as a white guy to say, look how far we've come. And yeah, we have, but I'm saying that as a 40-something white guy. So I don't deal with the situation on the ground today is really no different for me than it would have been for a white guy in 1950. Whereas, you know, as far as things have come since the 50s, there's still lots of problems today. We talked about this before we started recording, but the Georgia councilman getting, you know, I don't even know how to describe it. Do you want to describe the event? Or
yeah, so, I mean, I guess, you know, I guess I do want to wrap up this before we jump into that. I do want to wrap up Martin Luther King and the anniversary of his assassination. Where we've come very far. I think that I've seen some amazing opportunities, the opportunity to travel throughout the country, in a limited capacity out of the country. My ability to go to school, to go to a private Catholic school that had Black, white, Asian, other people in it, or all sorts of people in it. My ability to go to college, on the East Coast and experience life there. My ability to go to law school and experience life there. And the different people I met, the different experiences I've had, and even my ability to come out and work after the fact, and the different opportunities my jobs have afforded me in terms of travel and interaction. A lot of that can be accredited to Martin Luther King and what he did for people who look like me. If there was a time where you and I wouldn't be able to do anything remotely close to what we're doing right now, just the fact that you and I interacting in public would have been a crime. Me sitting at the same bar as you would have been a crime.
Right.
So we've come there. This country has come very far. But we can't pat ourselves on the back and say the work is done. Now let's just sit back and enjoy it. It's obvious that that's not accurate or that's not true. We don't live in a colorblind society. We never will. This whole idea of colorblind to me is ridiculous. I mean, we always acknowledge people's height. We say, Shaq's 7'2", and that, he stands out. Very short people, whether they're midgets or just, a short girl that's 4'11", that's always pointed out. Redheads are pointed out, the gingers and so on and so forth. Like, we notice people's differences. That's what humans do. So don't tell me that you're colorblind. Just because you recognize the fact that I'm Black, or you recognize that someone is Asian and Latino or whatever, that's fine. It's when you start to hold those immutable characteristics against them just because they had those immutable characteristics where we have a problem. And we still, in this country, have a problem with people looking at Black people because Black people have been stigmatized to the point where just the thought and the name, when you say it out loud, when you say Black person, there's a flood of negative thoughts that come to people's heads. And that's the thing that we have to work on. Like, we don't have Jim Crow. We don't have, legal segregation. We don't have lynchings, kind of, quote unquote, so to speak. But we still have, very deep rooted problems because this country's never dealt with its original sin, which is slavery, and its treatment of Black people and the actual integration of us into society. So where we were was bad, where we're at is better. We still have work to do. Dr. King didn't die in vain because, again, my opportunities, what my daughter's opportunities will be, and all of that is just a reflection on what he meant, but we have to continue to push forward.
I'm not going to be able to make any comment that makes that any better. So well said.
Well, thank you, Jim. I know that pat on the back burned your skin a little bit, but that's okay.
What's that?
I said I know that pat on the back just chapped your dick a little bit, but
no, it didn't. All right, I'm not going to let you get away with that.
I'm kidding. I'm not. I am.
It's all right. I'm in recognition of what you just said. I'm going to not defend myself, even though I know you love poking me with a stick and watching me dance. And so anyway, now you want to talk about Georgia?
Yeah, so the stay in Georgia was nuts. I saw it in the news feed, and so it's actually kind of two pronged in that you have this city council meeting going on, and it's in Griffin, Georgia, where most of the city council members are white except for two. You have this former elected official who comes up to speak, and he points out the one black male on the city council, starts talking to him about their past sort of interaction, and then he starts talking about his history, and then that's when it goes kind of haywire, because this elected official is talking about how he lived in the white section of town, but it was real close to nigger town.
Okay, let me play it, and then we can talk about it. I've got it. Let's play it, and then we can talk. Okay.
Okay.
My name is Larry Johnson, 122 Sherbrooke Way, Griffin, Georgia. I too did not come prepared to speak tonight, but what the heck? Looks like it's a good thing to do. Baby, smile. When I get through, we still gonna be friends, if we were friends to start with, because I'm not gonna change.
Neither am I, sir.
You've already changed, Rodney.
No,
Yeah, you have. You got better, son.
Oh, thank you.
I thought you'd like that.
I do like that. Thank you.
See, I remember, Rodney, serving with the board on you a long time ago. And you talking about saluting the flag or pledging allegiance to the flag. You remember when you would not pledge allegiance to the American flag?
I do recall.
You remember you and I went out when you wouldn't salute the flag, I started wearing my Confederate belt buckle. You remember?
I don't think that's the way it happened, but
well, I think so.
There was a time.
But you and I went out there, and I was going to say we stood toe to toe and head to head, but ain't no way we stood head to head.
True.
So
all right.
we just stand toe to toe.
Okay.
And we talked, and I told you where I came from, and we had an understanding, and you understood me much better after that, and we served together pretty good after that.
We did.
I told you at that time that they were white folks, they were black folks when I was growing up.
Okay.
There was white trash, my family, and there was town. I live next town.
You live next to what town?
Town, son, I'm telling you. Now, I've changed. I'm no longer white trash, and they're no longer called that. Now, wait a minute.
Hold on one second.
Mr. McCord, let him have his
Now,
minute,
let me
please.
finish.
Mr. McCord, please.
Now, if
did
that's
he just?
offensive, I apologize for being offensive, but I told you that.
Mr.
then.
McCord,
Now,
please.
let me just go ahead
I'm
and say
being
something. You
offensive.
said something about the flag.
I didn't say you were
It's my time to
offensive.
speak. You said something about the flag.
I'm not going to sit here.
Mr.
Okay.
McCord,
And now maybe y'all are comfortable with that. Now I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and let this man use that type of language. And if nobody else is offended, then I am. Now if y'all think if y'all want to clap and think that that's okay for this gentleman to stand in 2018 and get here at the Board of City Commission meeting, 2018. The Civil War is over, and he is using the N word, not once, not twice, 3 times, and he just continues to say it
Mr. McCord.
with not word about who it offends.
Okay, so you just heard it live. This guy comes on, and he, in my mind, clearly has an agenda. He wants to start. He wants to poke Rodney McCord with a stick and try to get a reaction. He wants to agitate. To me, it sounds like he's playing the back in the good old days, I could say nigger town and no one said a word about it.
Right.
And, I mean, he's an old, dopey Southern guy, and I'm not trying to give him a pass because he's old, but I took this as a clear attempt, right? When he starts talking, he's like, "You've changed, son. You've gotten better." That's just a setup for I'm about to push a button and see what I get away with. I thought Rodney McCord handled it perfectly. I think he didn't let it stand. He didn't lose his cool. And again, this is me as a 40-something white guy. Really easy for me to say. What was your reaction?
You know what? So the 70-year-old white guy from Georgia talking about Niggertown at a public meeting isn't news, isn't a surprise, didn't catch me off guard. Randy McCord's reaction makes sense. It's a sensible thing to do. It's 2018. He didn't go ape shit. He just called the guy out and said, we're not going to continue this with this guy speaking in this fashion. But what really stood out to me was the lack of reaction by the other people on the city council.
Totally agree.
You had the one guy who was sitting there saying,
Mr. McCord, let him talk. Yeah.
Yeah, McCord, let him finish. Like, wait, what? Let him finish. Just let him get through it, and then you could say your 2 cents. And it's just like, how are you? And that's where that to me is the biggest problem, right? Like, you have the guy who says it. Yeah, he says it, but he's saying it with a specific intent. It's refuted the right way by the intended target. But it's all the soft acceptance from the guy who wanted McCord to let him finish to everyone else who sat there and said nothing and let the guy, let the one black council member or the one of two, kind of take this on his own. What they all should have done is said, sir, you're done. Please go have a seat, and you won't be speaking at one of these things again. Instead what we got was a woman, one of them says, well, I think we should have a rule that there's certain words that you can't say at council meetings. Like, okay, no shit. Like, really? We're not,
well done.
In 2018, we have to make a rule that you can't say nigger at a city council meeting? Like, come on. Now, here's the other part. Here's the other kicker of this, the other part of this. And the reason why they were even having the meeting is because they had just approved making April the city's basically the month that celebrates the Confederacy.
Right.
And that's kind of what led to all this, is that the city council ended up passing this city ordinance to make April the month of the Confederacy in Griffin, Georgia.
Here in the beginning of the guy's comments, Larry Johnson's his name. He says something to the effect of, Mr. McCord, you would not acknowledge the American flag, so I came in wearing my Confederate belt buckle. Like, the Confederate belt buckle is a defense of the American flag. The disconnect there, and I know you and I talking about it isn't going to make it any better, but I can't get my head around how people think they can, wave the Confederate flag and not know that they are waving a flag that is literally spitting in the face of the United States of America.
Right.
I don't know how that gets disconnected.
Like, as long as I've been able to understand what the Civil War was, what it was about, how it happened, how it went down, and then you see people with, the rebel flag in their truck, or wearing a belt buckle or on a T-shirt, or, nowadays just posting it on social media. It's clearly so I have a couple thoughts on this. Just from a historical standpoint, it is the ultimate sign of treason in this country.
Yes.
Right? I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. They seceded from the Union. They fought the Union. And the reason why they did it was because they wanted to protect their rights as states to have slaves. Period. The end. Right? You're not going to tell us, as a Confederate state, you, the North, are not going to tell us about us having slaves or not. Right? Like, that's what the war was over. Now, they're going to say it was really about states' rights, and it expanded to other things besides slavery.
And state right to do what exactly?
Sure. Okay, fine. But it boiled down to them not wanting to give up slaves, period. Like, other people will tell you, well, the cotton gin was right around the corner. Like, tell that to a slave. How about you be my slave until I invent something that allows me to not need you anymore? Okay?
I'm sure technology would have made the whole thing go away, right?
Right, that's exactly what they're saying. But come on, we know that that's not.
That's idiotic. Yes.
Okay, fine. So besides the historical component of it, there's what we have today, and what we have today with people in the Confederate flag it's not that they actually believe that the Confederate flag is heritage and that they actually believe that the Civil War was actually fought over states' rights, right? Like they'll throw that jargon out there because it's, it's very Googleable.
Right.
I mean, you can always find something that fits the narrative that makes you feel better about a certain thought that you have. But really, now this is my opinion, that people who go around waving the Confederate flag, it is about them getting attention for themselves. It's about them tired of hearing about Black people, Black Lives Matter, Black people's rights, civil rights, Black people being offended, the gays being offended, women, all of that. Like they're tired of all of that. They want something that is authentically white. And so they go to the Confederate flag because it's the ultimate. Well, we know the Black people aren't going to pick up the Confederate flag. Educated, sensible women aren't going to pick up the Confederate flag. So, us country boys and girls will proudly tout it, and this will be our thing. You guys can have your civil rights nonsense. You guys can have your, rainbow flags and all that other stuff. But we're going to take the Confederate flag because this makes us feel like, this gives us kind of our symbol that we need for the attention that you guys are getting.
The most ironic thing to me is, having gone to school in West Virginia, having family still in West Virginia, the state of West Virginia exists because that part of the state of Virginia at the time did not want to secede. And yet you see Confederate flags in West Virginia. It's like, okay, you're now flying a flag that basically says, we don't recognize your reason to exist as a state, and yet, trust me, you don't have to look hard in West Virginia to find Confederate flags. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah.
So yeah. So anyway, yeah. The idea of a Confederate commemoration month in the state of Georgia, we've seen all the statues coming down, and the backlash against that is, us white folks are gonna do things to show that we're not gonna be pushed around by these liberal blah blah blah. And I'm not representing my opinion on this. Please.
Yes.
I know you're drooling to jump on me for this.
No.
Or you're thinking about it, but anyway, it's to try to celebrate the Confederacy. Just, if you're going to do that, own what it is. It was an attempt to defend slavery. It was an attempt to defend a time in this country that we should be disgusted by, and yet we're seeing people lashing back. They're feeling hurt. And, we talked about this in the past about how the whole, the Trump, calling it the Trump revolution makes me feel nauseous saying it because I don't want to give it that much credit. But a lot of what got him elected was people who were, lower middle class white, feeling like they were getting their country taken away, and this fresh voiced guy is going to change the world for them. And the irony of a fucking New York City socialite playboy being that to those people is hilarious to me, but it worked.
Yeah, it absolutely did.
And yeah, all right. So, excuse me. Sorry about that. So we saw this in Georgia, and then I've acknowledged, you and I've had this conversation 100 times on and off recordings where I've said, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, I was typical, liberal white guy, racism is dead, and I was wrong. I own the fact that I believed something, and I was wrong. Enough said. But we rarely see evidence of how bad things can get. And I don't want to represent this as like it's every day, everywhere. But there was a story that came out of Louisville where a then acting police chief wrote to a police recruit saying, what do you do if you see a teen smoking marijuana? Well, if they're black, just shoot them. And it went all kinds of off the rails. I mean, you said shit about how if the what do you do if their parents intervene? You said if the mother is hot, fuck her. If the dad is hot, handcuff him and make him suck your dick. And I'm sorry for using such vulgar language and vulgar imagery, but this fucking guy wrote that in a message. He was comfortable enough to put this into a correspondence with someone who was trying to become a Louisville policeman. Now, this recruit was not ultimately hired, but as far as I want to say we've come as a country, you see shit like that happening today. Actually, this is like 5 years ago or something, but still way too recently. And the fact that existed just makes me want to throw up. I mean, it's I'm maybe being too dramatic, but fuck.
But Jim, it's all over. Racism is all over. It's all dead.
It's all what?
I said racism is over. It's dead.
You said it's all over, not.
It's all over.
It's over.
Yeah.
Look,
no,
I'm owning the fact that I was wrong.
No, it's not. That really wasn't directed at you. That was just kind of the general sentiment. Whenever race comes up, you always have the one person who says, "Well, racism is just now. It's a manufactured."
Why do we have to talk about race? It's over.
Right. And so what I will say is that, Black people have been calling this out for years. Like, listen, you guys are saying that we're crazy. You guys are saying that we're looking for attention, that we're playing the victim. But, what you guys see when you're living in the suburbs or even when you live in the city, the way you're treated is completely different than the way that we're treated. And these police are getting away with a lot more than what you can even imagine. And so as long as there's no evidence of it, people can continue to point to, poor people and say, no, it's just because you're poor and you make terrible, terrible decisions. That's why you end up in jail. It has nothing to do with race. It has nothing to do with anything else. It's just because you make bad decisions. And part of that is because you're Black, because Black people make bad decisions. But then when you have evidence of someone coming out and saying, basically, if they're Black, treat them this way, and the way that we treat them is abysmal, then that sheds a little light on it. Now, the problem is that people will look at that and say, well, that's just that one guy, right? But how many of those just that one guys do we have to piece together? Like we continue to say, oh, a majority of the police officers are really good guys. It's just a few bad apples. But the problem is that we're getting more and more examples of police officers that are not good apples, right? Like we're seeing it, and then so you have, a certain percentage that are not good apples, and then you have another percentage that won't say anything one way or another against those that are bad apples. So all of a sudden, the numbers look a little bit more balanced than anyone actually wants to admit or talk about, right? Like, because if you have a bunch of police that will condone bad behavior, I don't know how you still can consider them a good apple. Right.
Yeah. I mean, if it's when silence or lack of, it comes down to the system enables, if not encourages, if not promotes that kind of mentality. And until we change that, it's not going to get better. I shouldn't say it's not going to get better. I do want, we talked about Dr. King, and it has come a long way, but then you get instances like this.
Right, but a big part of the reason why it's come a long way is because, in certain settings and in certain arenas, people have been, white people have basically been willing to stand up and say, not here. We're not going to allow that to happen here. Whether it be in the school system or, different professions. And so the same thing really needs to happen in across the police force. And
right.
Not to say that it hasn't happened in some places, but it needs to be much more prevalent, right? Because what the police have to deal with, and it's a real problem. It's not an easy one to deal with, but, they need to be able to trust each other in the streets. So,
True.
people talk about, people in the hood and in the ghetto not snitching and and not, helping their neighborhood because they don't want to be seen as a snitch. Well, that same thought and behavior, that same thought process and behavior pattern happens among police, for the same reason, because their lives are on the line,
Yeah.
right? Don't snitch. Why? Because if you do, then someone may come and kill you, or you can't be trusted and no one will work with you. You'll be ostracized, either just professionally or worse. And so when you have that sort of behavior and you combine that with the it's us versus them mentality, then you have a serious problem. And it also allows for, this veil of secrecy that becomes almost impossible to penetrate and allows this behavior, this inappropriate behavior that we saw in Kentucky, we saw in Baltimore. We saw all those cops in Baltimore that went down.
The gun task force, yeah.
Mike Wood, that he worked with a number of those guys. And it's not just New York, it's not just Baltimore, it's not just Kentucky. We've got issues here in Cleveland. We've seen issues like this in Chicago. It's pervasive all over.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say I don't know what the answer is, because I think we do know what the answer is. I just don't know if that answer is ever going to come to fruition in our lifetime. I hate saying that.
I think as you continue to have social evolution, you're seeing different mindsets. Younger people get involved in policing and prosecuting and the legal system, and overall getting involved in different aspects of civic duty. And the younger, the millennials and some of the younger people, even in my own generation, are a little bit more willing to do this more sensible, logical, socially responsible thing. And that,
good. Sorry.
No, I'm just saying, and that sort of thing takes time. It's not quick. It's not easy, but that's what it takes.
One funny thing to me is in the last several months, excuse me, mostly I think spurred by the Parkland school shooting, there is, if you look at social media, there is an attack by my age and older against young people, right? It's the whole Tide Pods and snorting condoms and all this stuff criticizing these young folks. And look, I've been grumpy old get off my lawn guy in some aspect a few times, and we've joked about it. But these attacks on these younger people is in part a resistance to the social revolution of these kids who have a different perspective. And those kids are going to be making these decisions for us 20 years from now. And good.
I won't necessarily jump on the bandwagon of good. I think that there is a lot of emotion involved with these kids. And, I don't think that governing based off of emotion is the best sort of situation for everybody. You really have to, I think it really comes down to looking at root causes. And so right now, what you're feeling, you're not necessarily we're not looking at root causes. We're just looking at kind of what happened after the fact and wanting to resolve that. But we don't really, no one's really digging into the actual root causes of these problems, of the school shootings, of violence in the inner cities and things like that. So I think their energy is good, but it needs to be focused a little bit. But obviously these kids want to be involved, and so you hope that over time, over the next 5 to 10 years, that they get the knowledge that they need to make that proper assessment on root causes and can kind of drive us and get us back on the right path if we haven't started to do so already.
I just think that their baseline when it comes to tolerance of racism is way better. They won't, the average 18-year-old won't hear what this douchebag in Georgia says and said, oh, that's just fine. He's going to hear that and say, okay, back up. This ain't 1950. Stop. Now, I'm not, the whole delicate balance of what is political correctness and what is social evolution. We could debate that for days and not go anywhere. But I think that, Rodney McCord's stopping that in its tracks was great. And I think, or trying to stop it in its tracks, it didn't go as well as it should have. But I think if you ask the average 18-year-old kid, white, black, suburban, urban, country, is that acceptable? The answer would be so different today than it would have been in 1950. And I'm seeing a social attack on these kids these kids are so stupid. Like, look, I grew up in the 70s and 80s. There was plenty of stupid in the 70s and 80s. So, you're seeing the whole, like I said, Tide Pods and attacks on the base intelligence of these kids. And I think it's part of a get off my lawn, dopey older guy, older person mentality. And I don't know. I'm kind of feeling a step in the right direction there.
So I'll agree with you. I think you're right. I think a lot of the pushback against these kids is rooted in that resistance to change. It's rooted in a disdain for just the
progress.
Idea that we've been doing things wrong, and then so people are, you have the previous generations getting defensive, like, how dare you young bastards come and tell us that we were doing it wrong.
Right.
And so, that's where you're seeing kind of some of this nastiness come from. And I think you're dead on the money. And I think that these kids have all the potential in the world, but just like with any young kid, whether it's in sports or in politics.
I'm not giving them all the, they still got some learning to do.
I'm just saying in general that, they really need to kind of focus their energy and harness on, actual solutions, and they have to be open to listening to all sides. Like, that's the one thing where I feel like they're not quite there yet, is because they are very quick to, if anyone disagrees with them, or if anyone says, I have a different point of view, they're very quick to go on, kind of ad hominem attacks and kind of shut the conversation down before it can even happen. And that's where things get unproductive.
I 100% agree with that. And I'm not trying to give them carte blanche, because, there's also the mentality of now, if you say a word, if you do this, whatever, that shuts off the whole conversation. There's plenty of criticism to go to this younger generation, to this more, easily set off mentality. But I do think it represents progress. To a degree, there's flaws.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's funny that we see all that, and then it's just like, and we're getting better. We're progressing.
Right.
So no, I agree with you. You're on the money there. It'll be interesting to, well, I mean, that police officer or that police chief was fired. His text messages or emails are only coming out now, kind of after the fact. And again, I think that he represents more than just himself. Like, he is not the only police chief out there saying and doing things like this. These things creep up on a regular basis. They get a little bit of media attention and then they blow over. This had happened, a few years ago and is only coming to light now. So there's not a lot that you can do about it. But this is not something that is unique to Louisville. But it's definitely something that when it does happen, we need to call it out, to say, you keep telling us that we're crazy because we're saying, police are treating people, in an unfair, illegal manner. And yet here's another instance of it.
Yep.
I mean, Steve,
this was a real.
You hold on to the receipts and you keep showing them until someone listens, or even if they don't, at the very least, you could say, well, You can sit there and tell me I'm crazy, but the people in Louisville are pissed because of the way that they're treated, and this is the person who is kind of at the forefront that dictates how they get treated. So you tell me what's going on.
And he made it to the rank of acting police chief. This isn't some random dude who was a patrolman in wherever. He was acting police chief for a while.
He was the actual chief of police.
All right.
I want to talk briefly, kind of piggybacking off of that. The Supreme Court made a decision this week where they said that a police officer can't be sued. In this particular instance, can't be sued for shooting a woman. They shot her 4 times in her front yard. They said that there was a disturbance. Police were called. 4 police show up. The woman exits her apartment with a butcher knife. Her roommate was close by. There was a fence between the police and the woman. As soon as she walks out, the police raise their guns. They tell her to drop the knife. She doesn't drop the knife. One of the officers opens fire, wounds her 4 times, not killing her. Once she recovers, she then sues. And it was initially denied, and then the Ninth Circuit ended up ruling in her favor, and the Supreme Court came back and said that the police officer, there was no precedent saying that the police officer could get sued if he did shoot her. So because there was no precedent that he could think of at the time, then he has qualified immunity, and so they're not going to make him eligible or available to be sued because there wasn't a precedent that he could think of at the time when he shot the woman, which I think is a ridiculous ruling. No police officer is going to sit there and go through their head of, oh, wait, is there a prior case where it says that I can't? Oh, no, there's not. Okay, fine, I'm good to shoot this person. Like, it's an insane thought process here. But really what it does, it makes it that much harder to hold a police officer accountable for their actions if you feel that they were not justified in, shooting you or killing someone you know or love. We talk about unarmed people being shot and killed by police, on a pretty consistent basis on the show. And what this does is say, all right, police, like at this point in time, there's really not much holding you back from using lethal force.
And Steve, to me, the big deal here is the legal standard, right? So, to find someone guilty of a crime and to criminally prosecute them, you have to show beyond a reasonable doubt that they committed a crime. But when you go to a civil proceeding, now it becomes based on the preponderance of evidence. So, the level of vindication or standardization of vindication you give when you say not only can you be cleared of a crime by saying, well, I felt my life was in danger, I felt threatened, I felt scared, whatever, and walk. Now you're saying not only can you say, well, I felt scared or I felt threatened, therefore I did this and I'm going to escape criminal liability. Now you're saying there's no personal, not that money makes it better, but there's no personal / financial liability for the same thing. I know you love when I go OJ, but OJ was found not guilty by a jury that I think did the right thing in finding him not guilty. He was also found criminally liable by a jury, and I think they did the right thing too. Because the standard of evidence requirement is different. And what the Supreme Court ruling does, if I'm understanding it correctly, is say, no, you can't take it to the liability financial level, and that makes things, in my opinion, worse.
Essentially what they did, they've essentially said, listen, if it's not already on the books, somewhere that, whatever you're about to do, you can't do, then you can go ahead and do it, and you have immunity from being sued or charged because
Financial
no one else has
yeah.
been sued you know what I mean? Like no one else has been successfully sued for this, so you're good. But really, what it is the court going out and protecting police officers even more and insulating them from liability when you have when you have situations where there's a questionable use of force, and that's what's scary because right now on average, throughout all 50 states, you have about 1,000 between 1,000 and 1,200 people killed by the police every year, and so my fear is, are we going to see, with the current administration that's very supportive and unwilling to really go down the road of a civil rights sort of attack on police officers in these situations where, an unarmed person is killed? Are we going to see an uptick in that number? Maybe we do, maybe we don't. I don't know. But the fear is, police are already well insulated, and now the Supreme Court has stepped in and said, listen, you're all the way insulated because, if you do get sued, then, our case says that, you're good to go.
Right. You're not only criminally safe, you're civilly safe.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's a scary ruling. Because you'd like to think that when Stephon Clark has a cell phone in his hand in his grandmother's backyard and gets shot, the idea that an officer can say, not only can we shoot this guy and walk, even though he was carrying a cell phone, we're not even going to be civilly liable, and the Supreme Court's got our back. That's a scary thing.
I mean, it just firmly
was it a 5-4 decision? I didn't see the result.
No, I don't think it was that close. I think it was
sorry,
I think it was 6-3.
All right, man. I mean, we've been talking for almost an hour. There's two things there's one thing I really want to talk about. Before I get to that, I gotta bring up the craziest thing. We talk sports enough, maybe not enough. But did you see the Conor McGregor video?
Oh yes.
What?
Oh, yes,
this
did.
is the craziest. All right, in my lifetime, if I was asked to name the craziest things in sports, Mike Tyson biting Evander Holyfield's ear, Fan Man landing on Riddick Bowe and Evander Holyfield, the power outage in the Super Bowl between Baltimore and San Francisco, I think would be the craziest things I have ever seen. I'm not a huge MMA guy. I respect the sport. I do watch it a little bit. But what happened this week was the craziest fucking thing ever, in my opinion. Do you agree?
I mean, again, it's up there. I think Mike Tyson biting Evander Holyfield will definitely always get my number one
Steve,
vote, but
that was at least between two things where a referee could make a decision. This was a bum rush by 20 crazy people led by one of the biggest names in a sport. Granted, he's been out of the game, disrupting an event. Sorry to interrupt, but not sorry, because this is fucking nuts.
Well, and it's just bizarre. Like, it's kind of in the basement of the Barclays Center, and where the fighters were, I think they were leaving on a bus, and he runs after them.
Correct.
Grabs a dolly or a hand truck, picks it up, and just chucks it at the bus at the window, and it breaks the window, and then he ends up getting arrested, a day or so later. But to me, I didn't even find it humorous. I thought it was a black eye for the sport. I thought it made him, it showed me who and what he is. Whether it was play for attention, whether it was, he's desperate and kind of spinning out of control, or if he's truly just, I don't give a fuck guy. I don't have enough sense to think about my career or, my family, so I'm just going to do whatever the hell I want, because I've won some fights and I've got some money. it just none of it bodes well for who he is, what he represents. Um, I haven't been overly impressed with him as an MMA fighter. I have my theories on why he is supported the way that he is, which we could talk about another time. But yeah, I mean, this was just
all right.
yeah. I mean, I think this is just poor everything, sportsmanship, character, human, whatever. I mean, like someone could have gotten seriously hurt, including him. He's lucky that thing broke. I mean, that thing could have bounced back and taken him out or someone close to him. I mean, it was so it happened so
he was
fast.
with like 20 other guys. This was not like a momentary freak out. This was a coordinated attack.
I'm well aware. Yeah, he had a whole entourage with him. So
and I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
I think there may be a bigger issue at play here. I think he may be. There have been rumors that he's been at odds with the Irish mob. There have been rumors about him and being threatened, having his life threatened. I don't know what's going on. I'm not going to give him a pass and go conspiracy here. But this is nuts. This is literally the biggest name in the biggest combat sport of our time doing the craziest thing ever. And, he's probably going to jail, and he should. And that might not even be the end of it. I mean, fuck his career. I don't give a shit. The fact that he made $100 million for that farce of a boxing match with Floyd Mayweather. And now, by the way, thank you for making Floyd Mayweather look like a fucking choir boy there, Connor. Because he did, right? I mean, by comparison, Floyd Mayweather looks like a model citizen. No,
I mean, if you think,
no,
Floyd's
not with the domestic violence and shit, but you know what I'm saying. I mean, this disrupted his sport. This caused injuries to people that were about to compete that were not able to. And, I actually watched his court appearance because I'm stupid. And it was just bizarre. I mean, you're watching a guy who a year and change ago made $100 million to get slapboxed into submission, and he's doing this shit now? This is crazy.
Yeah, and again, I don't know what his justification was, what his reasoning, what his thought process was.
I mean, people are blaming on him being coked out of his mind. Okay, maybe, but being coked out of your mind does not explain the coordination that went into this. It is,
I think you're looking a little too much into he just made $100 million last year, so it's not surprised that he's got 20 people willing to run around with him like an asshole. And I don't think that they all had a plan. I think he just said, we're going to go in there and we're going to arrest these motherfuckers. And they said, okay.
And he did have a beef with one of the fighters in that card. I don't know the backstory of that totally, and I don't want to overthink it. But all right. There's one more thing I want to throw out there. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we start wrapping it up? Because I want to talk about Ed Ates.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
So last week, I brought up the Truth and Justice podcast with Bob Ruff, and I in no way want to step on his toes. He did come on our old show, and he's done a bunch of stuff that I admire, including bring up the case of Ed Ates, who was convicted of a brutal sexual murder in Tyler, Texas. And Bob Ruff did an amazing job of exposing how not only was the case against him pretty egregiously fabricated, it was also ultimately pretty clear not only didn't he do it, he couldn't have. And there's a whole bunch of things about it. I don't want to step on that show's toes. I highly recommend people listen to this podcast, the Truth and Justice podcast, and the Ed Ates case, and look at what that podcast did and how it affected lives. But Ed Yates had said at one point that, and on maybe several points, that he would not ever get paroled because in order to get paroled, he would have to admit that he had committed the crime that he was convicted of and show remorse. And he said he would die in prison before he admitted that he had committed the crime that he was convicted of. And due to a bunch of things, not the least of which was the Truth and Justice podcast, Ed Yates is paroled while still stating his innocence. And that is amazing. And I got to be honest with you, Steve, I listened to this podcast, the Truth and Justice podcast. I was at my desk at work, which is in a trailer with coworkers around me. And I walked out of the trailer because I got emotional enough that I did not want to start crying in front of my coworkers. And I got to my car and I held it together, and then I came back and I listened to Bob Ruff, who, as you know, I respect and admire, but he was a blubbering mess when he called Ed Yates' wife. And they were, talking about how they had just gotten word that Ed had been paroled. Excuse me. And a parole is not the same as an exoneration. They are still working towards that cause. And a parole is a scary thing. You and I traded some text messages, and, he's going to have to follow a bunch of rules, and he's always going to be one step away from possibly getting thrown back in prison. But Ed Yates will walk free in less than 90 days, barring a change of things. The Truth and Justice podcast is, I think, going to be releasing a conversation between Ed and Bob Ruff. And even if they don't, you can listen to Bob Ruff, talk to Ed's wife. It will take a while until he is actually released, and I was confused as to why. Excuse me. And then I listened to a follow-up episode on the Truth and Justice podcast, and the reason why is because when you've been in prison for a long time in Texas, their parole process actually has a reintroduction to society thing, which is, partially sad, but very real, that, if you've been in prison for 19 years, like Ed Yates has been, you don't understand, like, modern grocery shopping, modern banking, having an ATM card. I mean, this guy has been in prison since 1999. And I'm not going to lie, I'm tearing up talking to you. I am so happy that this guy, who I've listened to talk to Bob Ruff, I've listened to Bob Ruff talk to his wife, and I've heard the case and the story behind it, and the details behind how he was imprisoned, and how he was basically put in prison because a jailhouse informant lied under oath and said things to put him in prison. And that same jailhouse informant told Bob Ruff that, hey, this guy's in prison wrongfully. I lied to put him there. And I don't know if he's innocent or not. I just know he's in prison because I lied. Please look into it. And 2 years later, that man, who by multiple accounts is a just good, solid, decent person, is about to walk out of prison a free man. It just shows the power of modern, of podcasts. I mean, Steve, you and I will never free somebody, at least I don't think we will. And anyway, I'm sorry for getting all off track and maybe a bit emotional, but I was so moved by this and so impressed with what that podcast did. And I'm so happy to hear this guy is going home. I mean, it doesn't give him back the 19 years he lost. And when you hear the whole story and realize or hear how horrible a miscarriage of justice his conviction was, it will make you inspired to know he's walking and make you throw up knowing that kind of thing can happen. But all you can do is look forward and say, at least Ed Ates will be reunited with his wife, will get to go to his kids' graduation, listen to the podcast. Thank you, Bob Ruff. All right, I'll stop.
Okay. All right, man.
Was that good enough?
Well,
I'm glad I didn't have to do this face to face because I am getting a little emotional and I can't blame it on the whiskey because I've been drinking shitty boxed wine the whole time we've been talking.
Oh my! That's
Bottle box Red Evolution.
That's
yes,
catchy.
yeah. Well, you know what?
Listen,
yes, sir.
Well, listen. I think with Ed Ates, that's it's remarkable. It's the power of social media. It's the power of new technology. Podcasts and getting the word out and spreading it. But a lot of people had to put in a lot of man hours. That wasn't just a bunch of people writing letters.
True.
You had to have prosecutors and defense attorneys
and the Texas
lawyers.
Innocence Project. Texas Innocence Project. There's a lot of credit.
Yeah, the Innocence Project, and a lot of people kind of get on board and put in some real nitty gritty work to get to where they are, and there's still some work to be done. So congratulations for them to getting to this point, and hopefully they're able to really bring it all home. With getting that conviction overturned and really having him to be truly free. But with that being said, my Beats headphones are about to die, and that's how I'm talking to you right now. So I've only got 5% life left.
Good product placement, by the way.
What's that?
Good product placement.
Well, I mean, yeah, I have mixed feelings about them, but but they are about to die. I need to charge them because I need them for my workout in the morning. So Jim, it was good talking to you, buddy, and we'll talk this week. And thanks everybody for listening.
Sounds good, Steven. Talk to you soon, brother.
All right,
later. Bye.